Hi and welcome to this video blog with me, Wayne, from swimmingcyclingrunning.com. Well, this blog was prompted by two conversations I had recently about running technique. The first was with Dr. Neil Messenger of Leeds University. He specialises in biomechanics and correcting faults, and also in footwear manufacture and analysis. And the other was at a track with a pole vault coach who knew I was a triathlon coach, came up to me after the Olympics and said, "Why do triathlon runners run like sprinters? I can't understand it." And the reason he said that was because he saw Alistair Brownlee and naturally assumed that he was completely four-footing or forefoot striking, and finds that peculiar because, as he said, in general conventional wisdom, the best way to strike is from the heel. And you might find that peculiar, especially for a coach who's coaching pole vault. Wouldn't you want to get in as fast as possible? Effectively, he's coaching a sprinter who then plants a pole and tries to ride it to the top of a large and big object. So it's interesting because Neil Messenger, Dr. Neil Messenger, I was at a party with him and chatting away, and we were talking about footwear, and he said the best footwear he likes is a barefoot. He said he can't think of anything better to run in a barefoot. And I said, well, why? He said, well, effectively everyone naturally runs hitting their heel on the ground, or that's the most natural way to run. And therefore, what happens is you hit your heel on the ground and it hurts. Now in a shoe, it doesn't hurt so much, but you're still putting the same force through that heel. Whereas barefoot, you hit the heel, it hurts, you adjust. He said, well, forefoot running, he said he thinks it puts too much strain on the connective tissues and the muscles. And he may well be right, but it certainly looks as though forefoot striking from Alistair can be pretty good. And certainly I think we do need to use our connective tissue more when we're running. We need to stand up when we're running and not sink into those heels as normal runners do. They sort of have a sink, run as they run along. We'll show some examples of that. But it's interesting that a lecturer of biomechanics thinks that it is better to heel strike than it is to forefoot strike. Whereas I actually believe he's slightly in error. If you can teach yourself to use your connective tissue to run correctly, then it has to make sense to use the connective tissue and not your muscles. Because if you use your connective tissue and not your muscles, you're actually not going to tire quite as fast as someone who's using their muscles to run. However, I don't think anyone should get beaten up about how they land, so long as they land with their foot under their body and underneath their centre of gravity as they land. And if they do that and keep themselves tall and don't sink into their heel, I think you can actually get a really good running technique however you strike. I do think, though, it's interesting to explore different running shoes. Vibram 5 Fingers. I particularly like the Nike Frees, which are completely split on the sole and bend any way. And the professor didn't like those because of the heel section. He said the heel section's too thick, it's too big, it doesn't know what it's doing. But certainly I feel very, very comfortable in the forefoot when I'm running in those, and I do tend to try to mid or forefoot strike most of the time. I've built my connective tissue up so they no longer give me trouble. However, one word of warning: if you do go from any kind of strike to another kind of strike, it takes time for your body to adjust. You can't use Vibram 5 Fingers and go out for a 10k run. You have to go out for a walk where you run 100 metres. Then you have to go for a faster walk where you run 200 metres, and continue like that every other day until you're happy running 1k, then running, or 500 metres even, and then running 1k, and then 1.5k. But you don't go out and think, right, well, in ordinary shoes I can run 10k. I'm going out to run 10k in Vibram 5 Fingers that have just come through the door. If you do, A, you're asking for trouble, and B, you will get injured and it's an instant 6 weeks off. You have to give yourself 6 weeks to recover. We're just going to show you how Alistair actually does land, and then some reasonable running from my own athletes that I coach. And then obviously I'll see you next week with a blog that I don't know what it'll be yet, but hopefully it'll be something interesting. One of my rants perhaps next week about something. All right, thanks very much. See you soon. Okay, so let's take a look at Alistair running here. And you can see it does tend to look like he's running mostly on his forefoot. But when we slow that down, we take him back just a touch and go frame by frame, you can see his right foot there is actually landing very much flat. And his left foot, although he is toe down at some point there, actually when it's landing, lands flat as well. But what you will notice is these knees are completely together as he lands. So he's very balanced with his weight over his landing point. Let's just run this forward. Okay, again, we're just about to land on the right foot. And if we look at it, he definitely lands in a flattened way and then instantly drives off. There's no delay between landing and driving off, or minimal delay. What you'll find with a lot of poorer runners is they land and that doesn't happen. They're sinking into their ankle and that takes time. But that drive off the foot instantly happens. And you can see it again. It's one frame to the next is off that foot and driving to go forwards. And that's really where he gets his speed from. And that's what most people should attempt to try and do when they run.
We're now going to look at another runner, Gary. As he runs in here, you can see he's got a fairly nice style. He's a pretty new runner, and he was injured last year. But if we look at his footfall, we can see it's got a flat footfall, but a balanced posture as he runs. Unlike Alistair, though, he's sinking into his ankle. You can see that sinking into the ankle as his knees come together. If we take it slightly forward, you can see as it lands, it's flat-footed, but then he has to sink into his ankle to get the knees together. And before the knees are together, it's impossible to drive off the back foot. And if we draw a line, that just needs to move slightly. We can see that his foot, his hip and his shoulder are pretty much in line. So that's a pretty balanced running style. It's just this sinking into the ankle we have to change. The change will probably take about a year to develop the strength that he'll need in his connective tissue so that he doesn't have to sink. And the strength to drive off that back foot the way that Alistair does. So he's got a very swift footfall and doesn't remain in contact with the ground too long. And you can see it's a nice running style, but that sinking in gives him a chance to develop, but he's not quite there yet. Okay, we're just going to take a look at another runner here, Andrew. And Andrew's quite a fast runner. He's more of a runner's shape than Gary is. And he does run faster than Gary at this point. But you can see that when Andrew runs, he runs and lands in a flat foot, fairly nice, flat foot, but his foot's well in front of his body when he lands. And it's primarily because he has a bend in his body. And that causes him to land with his foot very much in front of his body, even though it's a flat foot. If you look at this line, his foot and his shoulder might be in line, but his bum is well behind. So this bend in his body is actually forcing him to land with his foot in front, which actually shortens his stance, shortens his height, and he has to then drive upwards as well as forwards to regain that height with that leg. And if you look at the angle that he's actually got, it should be 180, whereas the angle to his head to his foot is actually about 153. So we need a straight body more than a bent body. And if you're going to have a lean forward, then make sure your whole body leans forward. Otherwise, you tend to sink into the ankle too much, which is what Andrew has done here. Now, although he runs fairly fast, this means there is actually room for improvement. He's using his muscles as opposed to using his connective tissue, because he has to sink every single time into that foot. So that's a good thing. There's room for improvement in Andrew's running, even though he's reasonably fast right now. But one thing he certainly does is he certainly lowers his body to get into that position and then has to push up again. So if we look at the head relative to the back, and if we draw a line there, you'll see that he actually has a bounce instead of being straight-headed on the horizon. Let's move that line a little bit. Okay, there we go. And as we look at him run now, you'll see that his head is bouncing below and above that line. And really we want it to travel along that line. Okay, so Andrew has room for improvement, and hopefully next year we'll have an even better runner than we do today. Okay, we're just going to take a look at one more athlete here, and this is Trevor. Trevor's another reasonably new athlete, and he has a different style to both of the other two. He's a heel striker. There you go. You can see the heel striking on the ground there. But what that tends to, he's fairly good at it, because his transfer of weight from rear to forefoot or rear to flat foot is quite good, so he can drive off the back. But as he's doing that, he also has this sink into the ankle, as you see there. He sinks into the ankle. If you flatten the foot on a heel strike and it's underneath your body, that's absolutely fine. But he's slightly in front of his body here, which means he has to sink into the ankle to let the knees catch up, from which point you can drive off the back foot. Now what that does is it tends to give you what Andrew had, and that's this bounce in your running style. And I think you can see it there as we're turning him backwards. And if we had a line that we did with Andrew along the head, yeah, that's a bit off. Let's try and get it straighter. There we go, just a bit wrong. Let's run it forward from a straight line. And you can see that bounce in the head because he's landing in front of his center of gravity. If he was landing on his center of gravity, that wouldn't happen so much. So the footfall is there, and then he has to sink in, lower himself, and then rise up again, which again you don't really want to do. And effectively, that's our whole point about running style in triathlon. You can see he's fairly balanced. Everything is virtually over itself when he actually takes his weight on, but he's landing with that foot in front, and it would be far better if he and you landed with your foot underneath your center of gravity, so that you don't have this bounce in where you sink into the ankle and then rise up again. Well, hopefully that's helped you. Next week we'll be on to a different topic. Speak to you soon. Bye.